Yes.
Hi, Ella. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Great. Excellent. How are you? Nice to see you.
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Excellent.
I had a panic there because I had a problem before with this access code, but it's worked out. Okay, so I've got to share screens with you.
Okay.
Or no, rather, I've got to
let me share.
Let you. I'm making you a co-host.
Okay, excellent.
Great. So don't share your screen yet.
Okay. I'll just see. Oh yeah. I will not do it, but I'm just looking, but it seems to be working. Okay.
Great. I'm just going to get a glass of water. I'll be back in a minute.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Good. Excellent. Very good. Right, I'm going to start. I'll admit Mark LeBeau first. And
I will grab a glass as well.
There's Mark. Nice to see Mark. Mark, good to see you. Hope you're well.
Yes, I'm there. I'm there. Hello.
I'm not sure we've actually met in person since Tel Brack. Maybe we have, but
Yes.
great to see you in person. And Michael as well, and everyone else, Mohammed. Let me get my notes up here. Okay, yeah, got that. Good. Mark, is it a new thing that Zoom asks for an access code every time?
Yes, frankly, I don't know. Things happen like that or don't happen. I can't do anything. So normally we have one only license, and we have about 20 organizers. That's the problem, you see. So our does not have enough money for paying 20 licenses.
Oh, yeah, absolutely not.
So I just suggest, because I shall live in Indonesia soon, end of August, for 2 months. And I suggest, if there is any problem, you should contact Licia Romano in Roma.
Yeah.
And she will act like I did. She will relay the code if necessary. Okay. But I'm very sorry for that. But it's you see, Zoom has new security regulations from this year, and this is not that easy for our association. That's a problem.
Great, thank you. And thank you for all your organization, Mark. It's quite amazing.
You're welcome. Welcome to Hella, of course.
Thank you.
We've still got people popping in. Can you still hear me?
I can.
Okay, it's just I got a message saying I was being signed out, but
Oh.
So Ella, I've made you co-host, of course, in the event that there's a problem with my internet connection, which could happen, but I don't think it will.
Okay.
I think you can carry on in any case. Let's wait another minute. Lots of people joining in. Well, Tello is generating lots of interest, which is as expected and as it should be, of course. Okay, so let us formally begin proceedings, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you all to the June session of the ARA Mesopotamian Lectures. And once again, thank you very much to Mark Lebeau for organising all this, absolutely tremendous, and to Ella with being with us this afternoon to tell us about recent research at Tello. Ella Egberts did her PhD at Bournemouth University in the Paleolithic of the Hampshire Avon Valley, using geoarchaeological methods to investigate hominin presence in southern Britain during the Pleistocene. And she's now an honorary visiting fellow in the School of Archaeology and Ancient History at the University of Leicester. Ella is a geoarchaeologist and lithic specialist involved in numerous research projects across multiple continents. Her research interests cover a broad range of aspects of human-environment interactions, including Pleistocene landscape change and hominin dispersal and adaptations, water management around early Mesopotamian settlements in Mesopotamia, and maritime heritage in the Zanzibar archipelago. She's been a member of the British Museum team at Tello since 2017, and it's with great pleasure that we look forward to her presentation, The Landscape of Girsu, New Methods and First Results. So Ella, welcome, and please share your screen, and we look forward to your lecture.
Thank you very much. Okay. I hope this will go smoothly. So thank you very much for having me. Today I will talk about the landscape of Girsu. Thank you for your introduction, John. So yeah, I'm Ella Egberts. I work at Girsu since 2017. And today I will talk about the landscape of Girsu and how we have applied some new methods and what kind of first results we got out of this. A little bit about Girsu and the project. So it started as the Iraq scheme, which was launched in 2016. This was a pilot project of the Cultural Protection Fund, and now the project is actually continuing as the Getty Girsu project. And the aims remain the same, to collaborate with the Iraqi State Board of Antiquities, to provide a training program with Iraqi colleagues, and work in the UK as well as in Iraq. So just to show you quickly, of course, where Girsu or Tello is located. So this is a map of the Middle East, Iraq, and then Girsu in relation to other ancient sites known in the region. And this is what the site looks like today from a distance. You can see the tell in the distance quite nicely raised above the plains. So the Girsu project is, other than focusing on conservation and training, it's also through excavations recontextualizing finds or material that was excavated, say 100 years ago by earlier archaeologists. But we are not only providing a new context or better context for those finds, we also look at the context of Girsu itself. So we would like to understand the urban landscape of Girsu better, understand the hydraulic landscape of Girsu, and reconstruct the wider environment, and therefore see how this changed through time, how this is related to the site, what we can tell about political, social, developments in this environmental context and what we see in the urban landscape and hydraulic landscape, maybe changes that we can link to this. So what I will talk to you about today are some remote sensing and geoarchaeological methods that we have applied to try to get a better understanding of the landscape of Girsu. So for remote sensing, we've used satellite images and systematic drone survey, and then excavations. I will talk a bit more in detail later as well. First of all, the remote sensing. So I've been using actually Bing Maps, so satellite images are freely available through Bing and Google Maps. This was a bit of a coincidence that whilst I was working on QGIS, that I realized that Bing was showing super high resolution images of Tello, in which we could actually identify what we thought were structures on the Tell. So this got us very excited, and we realized that this should be something that needed a bit more attention. So we didn't only focus on the Bing Maps, but also decided to conduct a systematic drone survey. So by flying multiple systematic drone flights, we generated over 20,000 images, which have all been processed in AGSoft, Metashape, and georeferenced, all thanks to Dita Ausina, my colleague and friend. She made an amazing high resolution auto-rectified image of the entire site, which also offered us a digital elevation model of the site, which is of course very exciting and very useful in understanding the landscape, and especially processes that affected the Tell after its use. So very useful data, essential for the work we're trying to do. So the remote sensing was analyzed in QGIS, and then for the excavations in relation to the remote sensing data, we conducted 2 area excavations specifically related to the remote sensing data, and conducted various geoarchaeological excavations on what we thought were channels. I focused on sedimentology by logging the sediment sequences, the channel morphology through section drawings, and of course, trying to get samples for dating, environmental and geochemical sampling. And wherever there was any archaeological evidence, of course, this was considered as well. So first of all, the results of the remote sensing. The right image shows our ortho-rectified image, very high resolution image, and you can see how it covers the entire Tell. On the left side is the Bing image, and we decided as a bit of a methodological experiment that I would be looking at the Bing images and Dita would analyze her drone image. And we basically did the same. We set out to do the same. We agreed on a grid and analyzed the entire site, in which we digitized any features that we identified on the images, looking at tonal differences, of course, any patterns, structures. You know what the drill is, you probably. And this is what we did systematically, individually, and then sat down and actually compared our results. We soon realized that, of course, the Bing image is slightly of less resolution than the drone image, that the Bing image was actually better for identifying the larger structures, so say the canals, although there might be a bit of a personal bias, but that's also an important point to recognize. Whereas the drone image, of course, had such a high resolution, it was actually very good in for identifying what we thought were structures. We also saw some above ground features that we didn't know what they were, but we mapped this as well. And together we generate quite a detailed map of the urban landscape and channels that were crossing the Tel. So this is a bit of an overview of what we identified. Of course, not everything is ground truth, but this is our digital assessment, and part of the work that I'm presenting today is, of course, the ground truthing of what we identified. And you can see it's really covering the entire Tel. And this image in the corner shows you how clear some structures can be on the drone image. A point to make about the Bing image when you analyze this in QGIS, of course, this is updated on a regular basis by Bing Microsoft. So the image that I was actually using for the analysis has now been updated and has been taken, of course, at a different time of year, different setting, different conditions, and some features are now less clear in the most current Bing map than the one that I was using back then. That's of course different when you actually buy satellite images, but the Bing is freely available, which is great for everyone to use. So as I said, there was also a complex network of channels that we identified based on the satellite images and drone survey. This is the Bing image, and you can see there's a network of overlapping channels that is clearly visible on the Bing image. And so to understand the structures that we identified on the remote sensing data, we conducted 2 targeted area excavations that were interesting in terms of our remote sensing data, but also interesting in terms of our other archaeological and conservation work that we were conducting at the site. So here on the left, you see area J1, which is located south of the temple complex, the temple of Girsu, where the French excavated in the 1930s and where we did the main excavations over the last 5 years, recontextualizing the finds from earlier archaeologists. On the right-hand side, you see the bridge structure also excavated by the French in the 1930s and before. And the blue square is indicating this area. So again, a structure that is actually closely related or in the vicinity of another important archaeological structure. So this is the bridge, and here you can see a trace of the channel, and this is the structure just right next to it. The reason why we picked those in terms of remote sensing and ground truthing is that we actually saw an inversion of the pattern. So on the left side, what we thought could be walls are colored lighter than the infilling of the rooms, and on the other hand, so near the bridge, this was inverted. So we see light colored infill and darker rooms. So by excavating those 2, we could also try to understand what this difference was due to. Taking a closer look at first area J1, which was excavated by Charlotte Freyers, we unearthed 2 structures which were both dated to the early dynastic 3, and something that could be a path or a stream. There are some wadis that were actually modern wadis that obscured the structures here a little bit. Here it's very clear, but this is in line with what we identified on the remote sensing data. And it was actually shallow, so right below the surface, and infilled with wind-blown deposits, and then we found mud brick walls and a nice figurine here. Actually, this photo shows you what it looked like on the ground. So in area G1, Lisa excavated there, and this was a beautiful, beautiful area as well. We only started excavating, well, only, it was a massive area, but only started excavating one corner of what we identified as this or thought to be a structure. Here we could actually identify two phases, and the first phase was the Ur-3 phase, where the building seems to be subterranean storage spaces, because there's no doorways and very little occupation material except for in the kitchen. And this phase is followed by Isindasa phase, during which the subterranean rooms are raised and filled with sand, and this sand actually included Uruk pottery. So this is very, very interesting. The sand must have been sourced from a canal or a channel somewhere else. And interestingly, including this Uruk pottery, that gets me very excited. But it's also interesting because this actually explains the difference between the dark walls and the light infillings, which is different from the other excavated area. So just to compare them again alongside each other. So this is the structure close to the bridge. And this is what we see elsewhere on the site, where we have the dark walls. Oh no, yeah, this is actually also dark walls. But this is particularly because of the sand infilling that was used to raise the subterranean rooms to a higher level and then prepare for another phase of building activities. And it's the sand that is so clearly visible in this case and shows so clearly what the rooms looked like. So the structures are actually often very clear on the, especially on the drone images, and the different fields, so different contexts give a different appearance on the images. And as I said, we also identified a complex network of channels, and I will focus first a little bit on one of them, and then talk a little bit more about how we can use this information from this one also to understand the other channels. So this is what we call channel 2, which runs from basically the north to the south, southeast. And you can see it has a fairly straight course, and at some point possible earlier course that would have continued in southern direction, but the later phase that we can see most clearly seems to run in southeastern direction. And I'll show you two examples in a bit more detail how the satellite images and drone images can give more information about these channels as well. So here we can see some internal structure actually within the channel, which is channel architecture that shows lateral accretion of sediments, which suggests a slightly sinuous flow within a confined straight channel. And here you see, so this is higher in the north of the tell, you see a possible earlier channel below this one. And I'm telling you this because it is actually showing that there is, on this, we see the last phase, of course, most clearly, but with excavations and detailed analysis of the remote sensing data, we get a more complex picture. What we see in, for example, this channel 2, but this counts for the others as well, is in generally two sedimentary phases, one of massive red-brown clay and silt that is found at the base and the edges of the channels, and then medium to fine gray sand that lies uncomfortably over the fine, so over the clay. Very clearly defined. This is like a ribbon-like geometry with an abrupt boundary between, so this image shows this very clearly, an abrupt boundary between the faces, usually a concave upward boundary and a poorly defined upward fining. So there's basically sand just right until the top of the tail. That's actually why it's also so clearly visible, because we have the sand right until the top. And right next to it, we have the fines from the clay and silt. So the difference is very clear in terms of sediment, and therefore all the other properties of water retention are very defined at the surface. Within the channel, we see planar cross-bedding, which is an indication of slightly sinuous flow within a confined straight channel. Actually, all these characteristics that I just named bring me to this conclusion. And we actually see multiple straight channels, although within that, with the sinuous flow, within the same channel belt that is raised a little bit above the plane. And because there's no finding upward, we see, and we can actually conclude that there's a rapid channel abandonment, like a sudden hindering or a diversion of flow, which is again interesting information if we want to understand how these channels worked and how they were used over time. So as I said, we see this also in the other channels, the clear concave boundary. This is an example where we see a previous channel underlying the last one that we see, that we see most clearly on the surface. And this is what it looks like on the drone image. So you see the last channel here and the remnants of the previous preceding channel just there. This section drawing is actually of this channel, but it's flipped. So this is the last phase, phase 5, and we identified the preceding phases. So the channel is shifting laterally, and the one that we see most clearly on the surface is, of course, the final one. And the remnants of the previous one are just alongside the last channel. So not only within the channel we see different phases of channel activity, but also the channels among each other. We can, of course, by looking at which one overlaps, which one, we can see phases of channel activity. And this is a nice example that is in the southeast corner of the tell, where we have this later channel actually kind of overlapping with this earlier one. Also in the field, the difference is quite clearly visible in terms of elevation of the more recent channel. And this is a little cross section actually across the two channels, showing also the height difference. And that brings me to the digital elevation model, which we also obtained from the systematic drone survey, which has been, of course, very useful in trying to understand these these kind of chronologies and structures within the channel. So this is the tell, this is the digital elevation model. And just to illustrate the tell as well, I have made these cross sections. So this is west to east and north to south. And these very high spikes are the spoil heaps from the French excavations. This has also been useful in, as I said, looking at the kind of relative chronology of some channels. In this example, you see that this channel, even though it's only 20 centimeters, but it looks quite a lot, but at least it's higher than this channel that we thought indeed was preceding the other bigger channel, based on which one overlapped with which one. But it also shows that that we are probably missing quite a bit of sediment, because if we make a long profile on top of the channel, there is some difference going downstream. So this is a good indication that we are actually missing quite a bit of sediment on the northern part of the tell. So based on the remote sensing data, we proposed, of course, carefully relative chronology. So this was really just looking at which channel overlapped with which one. It's not always that clear, but it was a working hypothesis just to test some other ideas. And this is what we came up for preliminarily. And the good thing was that we could, well, we of course said, okay, now we also want to date this. So we could use this to compare our dating results with. With the remote sensing and geoarchaeology, we see multiple subsequent channels within the same channel belt. We see a rapid channel abandonment, and we see a relative chronology of different channels. And these shifts between the channels, but also within the channels, actually may reflect the constant management or interaction with the water. And what is, of course, interesting is to try to relate this to practical or environmental, political factors. And therefore, of course, we want to date the channels very carefully, so we could actually try to make this story complete. But as I showed you before, we just had a relative chronology, and we set out a dating program to obtain many samples from many different channels, from most of the different channels, to try to get a better understanding of the chronology of these channels. So we have 11 cross sections, some test bits, and 22 C14 samples. And of course, we use these to look at all the cross sections that I showed you before. And then when I compare the C14 dates with the phase that we proposed, we see a general trend in the C14 dates that matches the relative chronology that I came up with based on the remote sensing data, a few outliers. But then we also compared this with the archaeological data, and that actually does show a bit of a discrepancy, because you can see here that all the C14 dates on shell are actually predating the archaeological evidence. And yeah, the archaeological evidence came from the base of the channel, so the final chance should be the final channel fill, and the shells came from the channel fill. So there is a problem with our shell C14 dates. And this is another case that is also interesting, is that we have very different C14 dates from one and the same channel, but that might be explained by these different phases that we need to understand better. But my preliminary explanation is that we have the hard water effect from the Euphrates and the Tigris that impacts the C14 on the shell. So we have the fresh water effect, and therefore an age overestimation on the shell. We compared this with some charcoal samples, and there we also see an age overestimation of the shell, where the charcoal is actually in very good agreement with the archaeological evidence. So the difference, the magnitude of difference might be between 350 and 1,000 years. The solution is, of course, a multi-method dating, for example, C14 combined with optically stimulated luminescence dating. We have sampled this last season, but unfortunately haven't been able to export the samples just yet. So this is ongoing work. But as I mentioned, there's also the issue of different ages from the same channel, but this may be reflecting the different phases of the channel. And this again highlights the problem that we might be missing some sediments in some parts of the site. So you see here a long profile from channels 2, where we have found the base in 3 different trenches. And at least in the most southern one, we have 2 meters of sediment filling in the channel. But higher up, we only have a meter or so, or a bit less, of sediments filling in the channel. And in these cases, we did find pottery at the base. Here, unfortunately, we didn't. So there's still work to do here to understand how this how this was either impacted by post-depositional processes, and how this maybe reflects different phases where we actually have multiple channels within the same channel belt that now looks like one, but actually covers up multiple phases of channel use. So to conclude, the high-resolution satellite images and drone survey are an excellent prospecting method in similar environments. This has given us very exciting new insights in the urban landscape and waterscape around Tello, and there's a lot more to discover. Also with different conditions, like early in the morning or different times of year, maybe we get a more detailed picture still. I would say, at least for working hypothesis, the satellite images can provide relative chronology that we then, of course, want to combine with archaeological research. So this we did to understand the structures, but also understand the differences that we see in the remote sensing data. And in terms of the channels and really looking at the waterscape around the sites, we need the archaeological excavations to understand the subsequent phases that are maybe covered by, of course, the most recent one. And to really understand this complex waterscape, which is clearly quite dynamic, we need better dating. That is my main conclusion. And we need to try to find a way to either continue with OSL dating and a combination of dates to better understand this, the shifts in the channels, the shifts in the waterscape. It would be very interesting, I think, if we could fine-tune this understanding. We could really see choices being made maybe about shifting channels, either in terms of practical needs, like water diverging towards the bridge or not. So practical needs, maybe political, maybe social, because the waterscape, of course, must have been an aspect in this urban landscape as well, maybe to delineate certain areas within the city. So the challenges remain also to understand the processes that actually affected the site. What do we see now? So the channels are so clear, some structures are very clear, but we see structures of different dates. So how does this relate to each other? and taken into that picture is the elevation. So we have all the different elevations also of the channels, but also of the archaeological material, which I actually didn't mention too much now, but like the early dynastic structure, how where it sits that in relationship to the early dynastic temple, for example. They're both at quite a height, and that really reveals to us at least a picture that the whole tell has different periods at a different elevation. So it's not one size fits all, or we understand the chronology or the stratigraphy and we're done. And I think the waterscape just adds another exciting challenge to that. Just to show you one last picture of these channels and the overlap that you can see. This is a drone image that we just took to do a more explorative view of the site, which is easier to do than the systematic survey. So it could be done any morning that you think it's a useful time of day, or because weather has been different, you can just take up the drone and have another look. Maybe it reveals another link or another channel to further complicate the picture, really. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you for having me.
Well, Ella, thank you very much. That's a fascinating talk, a very impressive piece of work, and your multidisciplinary approach really stands out. There's bound to be lots of questions. I certainly got some, so I'll take the privilege of starting, if I may. You mentioned how there are multiple channels crossing each other and channels come in and out of life and are replaced. Do you have an estimate for how long, on average, a channel stayed in use for?
No, not really, but we have been looking this previous season, well, in autumn, we've been looking at two channels very close to each other that were overlapping, and the pottery from those channels are both Ur3 Isin Larsa, which suggests that it's actually on quite a short time scale. So within pottery chronology, really, that these shifts may be occurring. That's also why we really need better dating to kind of have this, understand these shifts on quite small timescales, I think.
I'll follow up with that in just a second, but also to say to everyone who is participating, do please submit questions in chat or raise your hand, and I'll try and notice that too. But to follow up on the multiple channels aspect, why was it easier to dig a new channel than to clear out the old one?
I don't think, well, maybe they were not necessarily digging only new channels, because we see so many, well, actually phases within the same sort of channel belt. I think that was probably the easiest, to be honest. So we have 7 really like main channels, but within that, as we have been now getting a more clear picture of that, we see within these main channels actually multiple channels on top of each other. So I think that is kind of more like a reuse than digging a real new channel, which would be easier, like you say, because it's excavating through the sand or clearing up a channel is easier probably than digging through the clay and the silt again.
Right, thank you. Now, Michael Rofe would like to enter the fray. So Michael, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Thank you very much for a very interesting talk. It's sometimes said that the weight of the Mesopotamian tell makes it sink lower than the surrounding countryside. Did you investigate this, or have you any idea about this?
The surrounding countryside in case of Tello is around 8 meters above sea level, and the rest of the tell or the main channels are around, where we see them most clearly is between 9, 10, 11 meters above sea level. So it's still above the surrounding landscape now.
But presumably over, I don't know how rapidly sinking would take place, whether it be century or centennial millennium or whatever? Do you have any idea about how that might work?
My idea is that actually in the surrounding, surrounding the tell, there are the flood basins really. So if there was any channel there, maybe it's like obscured by flood basin deposits. So there it's less clear than on the tell, because that's also where there's the agriculture, there's the vegetation and all this taking place. And it would be, so if we think about these channels on the tell, I think about it as like anastomosing, the model of anastomosing rivers. You have the channels a bit higher above the flood basins, and the flood basins are where we find the sediment deposition. So that's any traces that would be outside of the tell are probably now covered by other sediments. That's my theory. Because outside of the tell, we quite quickly lose the trace of the channels actually, until we find another tell where we pick up the trace of a channel again.
That would suggest that the surrounding countryside is eroding rather than accreting.
No, I would say it's like a sediment dump.
How does the water get into these channels that are higher than the surrounding land? I mean,
yeah, the channels are connected to the bigger river system, which is all located slightly higher above the flood basins by natural levees, but the agricultural areas now, or maybe sometimes still marshy areas, that's where we lose the trace of any of these features in the landscape.
Sure.
But I mean, any ideas are welcome.
Thank you, Ella, and thank you, Michael. Now we have a question in the chat, which I'll come to very shortly, but I want to ask another question myself in the interim. You mentioned that there's lost sediment. Do you have an estimate of how much sediment is lost?
If my estimations are right, we are missing in at least a couple of meters of channel sediments in the northern parts, but I didn't crack this completely yet, because if that's all missing, then what happened with all the rest in this area of the site? And it's not that we find the sort of desert pavement of pottery in this area. So it's not my final conclusion at all. But it's clear that we see, if we follow the elevation of the top of the channel, which is not completely fine, but we compare it also with the long profile based on the base of the channel, water is not flowing upwards, right? So we are missing at least some sediments in, like, say, the northern part and the southern part, or the edges of the tell. That's my idea.
So thank you. I know that Nicholas Abu Salabik had an estimate that there were many meters which had been eroded, perhaps by wind erosion.
Okay, yeah.
From there.
It's good to hear about other estimates. That's great.
Okay, we're going to move on to a question from the chat, and then after that I'll go to Constance, who has her hand raised. But the question from Emily. So hi Emily, nice to see you here. So the question is, well, first of all, thank you for the fantastic presentation. I know you are still working on the dating, but on the basis of what you already have, are you able to revise at all the relative chronology of the channels for the remote sensing, or say for some periods how many channels were active?
I find it difficult to say. So with the archaeological data, that is all dating to the Ur-3 Eastern Larsa, more or less, at least on the eastern part of the tell, which would suggest at least that's the final phase. But for example, one channel on the western side, we also have some archaeological evidence from the early dynastic. But to really get an understanding of how much was active at the same time, I feel I would like to get a better dating, because also the archaeology is not that rich. We have some sherds in the base of the channel, But of course, it's not, and not even in every excavation that we did. So especially in the north, we don't have any archaeological materials, so just the C14 dates. So I find it difficult to really say what kind of time span do we have and how many sites were active at the same time. But of course, if one is overlapping the other, at least I think that should exclude their contemporaneity, but that doesn't mean that it could shift back again, that another channel becomes active again. So still a lot to learn.
Great, thank you, Ella. Now, Constance Manon would like to ask a question. So Constance, do please unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you. This was a fantastic talk and very exciting things. I was especially impressed by the fact that you could detect from your drones structures which were filled with sand for leveling. And that brings to mind, I wonder if there had been a ritual purpose for the sand, as had been done in some other similar time frame periods. And I also wanted to say that the contouring map and the discussions about the channels are fantastic, and it sort of is dovetailing what's going on at the Al-Hiba project at Lagash. I was wondering if you're in communication with each other. And I think they're doing some magnetometry to look for subsurface structures in addition to the drones.
Oh.
And they're working on changes of channel and river for habitation periods. So it's great that maybe we can put both things together.
That would be great. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
So I've got another question, Ella. Is there anything specific about the location of Tello in southern Mesopotamia that made it likely or inevitable that a major city would emerge at that particular location?
Oh, that's a good question. That brings us to a whole different level of discussion, I think. As I think I should be better informed about that to answer your question. I mean, I think it has been both on the Euphrates and the Tigris at some point, so maybe that helped in a way for a sort of continuity. But I have to admit, I have to dive into that question more deeply before I can address that. But it's a good question. Thank you.
Well, that's half of what these talks are for, to alert ourselves to new lines that we all need to follow. I've got one more question, which I'll ask in just a second, but I want to see if we have any more questions in either the chat or hands up, so it's not too late to enter if you wish to. So the last question I'd like to ask is about the text. Is work going on relating the work that you've done to work in either the royal inscriptions or administrative texts?
I would say definitely so, and of course for that I would need the help of other specialists, but that's of course one thing that would be fantastic to look at that more closely. My sources are of course other people's translations, which is also fine. Also, again, something that I need to spend more time on to make these kind of links. But I think it's a fantastic situation in Mesopotamia that we have this picture based on remote sensing as well as textual evidence. So I think that can give us a really great case to make this study about water management, as of course people have been doing. But we have the text, we have the picture actually based on the remote sensing, and then with the field work we can date it and really make a nice reconstruction, I think.
Thank you very much. Good. Well, I think that's it for the questions. So Ella, thank you again for a really interesting and inspiring talk. So many new lines of evidence and new approaches, which is, I know it's given you some new things to think about, but it's given all of us new things to think about too. So very impressive. Congratulations on that, and well done. So the ARA Mesopotamian series is going to take a short pause for the summer. We'll be resuming in early autumn with a talk by Rocco Palermo on the Hellenistic periods in northern Iraq, so maybe diametrically at the opposite end from Ella's work, but looking forward to that very much. So thank you all again for joining. Thank you again to Ella for your wonderful presentation, and I hope that you all have a great relaxing summer and look forward to meeting again in a short while. So thank you and goodbye to you all.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, Ella.